Welcome to Sisters in Crime Australia and Murder Mondays, when authors talk about their crime craft. I'm Karina Kilmore, a debut crime writer, a journalist and a national convener for Sisters in Crime, and we've been celebrating women's crime writing since 1991. Before I introduce Astrid Scholte, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. We pay our respects to their elders past and present. Astrid, welcome.
Thank you so much, Karina. It's so great to be here.
And congratulations again on winning the Davitt Award for Best Young Adult Crime Novel, and with your debut as well, Four Dead Queens, an amazing achievement.
Thank you so much. It's still so surreal to think that it won the award. So thank you to Sisters in Crime Australia. It's been a fantastic moment in a not so fantastic year.
Yeah, I know. It's a great book. I really enjoyed it. So fabulous work. I understand you were raised on a diet of Spielberg, Lucas and Disney, and you love all things fantasy. During the past 14 years, you've worked in film, animation and VFX, production mainly, but as well as your love of fantasy, you're also drawn to murder mysteries and true crime. That clearly showed in your debut, Four Dead Queens. But now you have a new novel, The Vanishing Deep. Before we get to the questions, can you please give us your elevator pitch for The Vanishing Deep?
Yes, of course. So this is the beautiful cover of The Vanishing Deep. It is a sci-fi dystopian thriller set in a world that's 99% water and where the dead can be revived for 24 hours.
Wow. Can't wait.
Yes, it's a fast-paced, thrilling adventure, and it focuses mainly on the love between two sisters, one who drowned 2 years earlier and the sister who revives her to find out the truth about their parents' deaths.
Oh, goodness, great. Sounds fabulous. Okay, let's get to our questions. Does your main character ever surprise you?
Definitely. So I am what writers refer to as a pantser, which means I write by the seat of my pants and I don't actually plan. I don't know where my stories are going. So I essentially sit down and start writing and let the characters take me on their journey.
And a great journey. What research did you do for your latest novel?
The Vanishing Deep was an interesting one because even though it's not set in our world, it's set in a world where a futuristic society has been completely washed away. And I had to look into certain things like how long things take to erode in water, how long things take before they float to the surface, especially after people have drowned. So a few gory elements, as well as some interesting facts like there is a specific tree that actually has a pulse. And that ties in with the idea of being able to revive the dead. So it took me a few strange little journeys when I did my research. So yeah, there was a lot of different things that I uncovered during that time.
Yeah. And actually, just before we go to the next question, what about the research for Four Dead Queens?
Four Dead Queens, there wasn't as much research. It was more just trying to establish these very different regions, the 4 different regions that each of the queens rule. So I would say there was more research and more, even though it's completely fantastical, more science-based in The Vanishing Deep.
Yeah, great. What is your writing routine?
That's a good question because it does depend on the day. So I do tend to write after work. So I still have a full-time job and I'll work usually from 6 till 9. If I'm working on deadline, if I've got revisions to do, that tends to be the time that I'll work. And then the weekends, I'll work all day Saturdays and Sundays. And I don't really have a routine of, something I have to do before I sit down and start. It's just sit down and, open the document and start.
Yeah. What started you on a life of crime?
Oh, that is a good question. I think, so I've thought about this a lot when I've been, writing about how murder mysteries appeal to me. And obviously that's not something that usually attracts, a young child, you're not drawn to murder mysteries. And I've always wanted to write ever since I was young. So I think my connection to crime and my kind of journey there actually began with the Osborne adventure books. They were a series of mystery books that I read and loved as a kid. Probably around 8 to 10 years old, I used to read a lot of those. And I think because I was always drawn to the mystery element of those stories, that then led me into the darker side of mystery, which is crime and murder mysteries.
Yeah. How much of you is in one of your characters?
I mean, I read sometimes authors say that there's a little bit of them in all of their characters, which I don't want to admit to because I have some dark, twisty characters and I don't like to think that there's a part of me in there. But I suppose they did spring from my imagination. I would probably say there's quite a bit of me in Tempest, who's the main character in The Vanishing Deep. She's very determined, very headstrong, and I think I'm that way in a lot of ways. But then I also have the more sensitive, vulnerable side that her sister Elise has. For Four Dead Queens, I really wanted to have characters that were not like me. And Carolee is very brave, very charming, very, unapologetic. And I'm much more concerned about what other people think and, a people pleaser. And she's not that way at all. So that was really fun to write.
Yeah, cool. Who should play your or one of your central characters on the screen?
Oh, I would love any of my books to be adapted, but I think for Carolee, I've always pictured Dove Cameron. I think she would be great. She has that real innocence, like she looks so innocent and so sweet, but I think she could really play that, that devious side because Carolee is a thief. So yeah, I think that would definitely be a great on-screen character.
Yeah, definitely. Who are your literary inspirations?
So many. As a child, definitely K.A. Applegate and the Animorphs series had a huge impact on me and my love of science fiction. So even though I do write crime and fantasy, I also have sci-fi elements to my books, especially The Vanishing Deep, and even in Four Dead Queens, there's a lot of technology and futuristic technology there. And I love Philip Pullman's His Dark Materials. When I was a teenager, I devoured that series. And I think that also moved me more from sci-fi into more of a fantasy realm. So they're two that stand out. And in these days, more current times, I love Leigh Bardugo's work. I think she's a magnificent storyteller.
Yeah, definitely. Why is crime so appealing as a genre?
I think for me, it's definitely the mystery element. And I think for readers as well, it's that have to turn the page, have to find out what happens next, who done it. And I think, it's that curious nature that we have as humans. We need to know what happens. And it's very kind of plot driven. It's very, here's a crime, here's something that needs to be solved. You feel like you can't leave it alone until you get that resolution. So I think just having that feels more pacey, it has more tension, and that's really what I think attracts readers and writers to the genre.
Yeah. Well, you've partly answered this. Are you a plotter or a pantser? Take us through your pantsing.
Yeah, definitely a pantser. I wish I was more of a plotter. I think it would help me a lot with my revisions. There wouldn't be so many revisions. But essentially, I start with a hook or a world building idea. So for Four Dead Queens, the world building idea was one nation divided into four very distinct regions ruled by four queens, but from a central court. And that actually came from a dream that I had where I was sitting in a horse-drawn carriage and a silver car sped by, this very futuristic car. And I woke up and I thought, why would there be these differing technologies in this one place? And what impact would that have on the people who live there? And why would it still be that way? So that was the only ideas that I really had for Four Dead Queens. I sat down and I knew I wanted to kill the queens off kind of slasher movie style, one by one on screen. And aside from that, I didn't know who did it. I didn't know where it was going, what the whole point was. But that was enough to excite me to, sit down and start writing. And for The Vanishing Deep, I actually got my inspiration, it's so embarrassing, from watching an episode of The Real Housewives of New York City, which is one of my guilty pleasures.
Yes.
And so that inspiration can come from anywhere, really. But I was watching an episode and one of the housewives said that she wished she had just one more day with her deceased husband. And that idea really stuck with me. And this was years before I actually sat down and wrote The Vanishing Deep. I wrote it in my little ideas journal. And I thought to myself, well, what would you do with 24 more hours? What would you be willing to sacrifice? And what difference would that make? What would that allow you to do? Would it allow you to, have that final goodbye? And then, I sat down and started thinking about, well, what world would this idea exist in? And that led me on to thinking that it would make sense if the planet itself was deceased in a way, which led me to the idea of this planet that was waterlogged, that the civilization had been wiped out almost completely hundreds of years earlier, and they had tried to revive crops. And during that process, they found they could revive organic matter that had been drowned essentially but only for 24 hours. So usually it's a very explorative process. I just sit down, start writing and see what happens. And I'll take lots of missteps, but it's much like, I think, exploring a novel. You don't know where it's going to go. So it gives me a lot of that joy that I hope a reader will then have when they read my book.
How important is place in your writing?
Very important. Yes. My worlds are so integral to my plots and my characters that I feel like you can't take a character out of my worlds and put them in another place. They just won't be the same people. They've very much been born out of their environments and their backgrounds, and that all comes from place. So it's something I really also want the reader to be immersed in. I want them to feel like they're there. And as someone who's worked in film and TV, I feel like I try and bring that kind of cinematic style to my writing so that readers really feel like they're a part of the place, the time and the place that the book is set in.
Yeah. As a reader, it really feels like that. What's the hardest part about writing a novel?
I think the hardest part for me is that 25%. So you've got that first spark of inspiration. You're really excited about the novel, where it might take you. You sit down, you start writing, and for me, I usually get 20 to 25% into a novel, and then things start to wane. And that's usually the moment where you wonder, should I give up on this? Is there actually enough in this to be a full novel? And that, little voice of doubt just kind of keeps chattering away in your ear. So pushing past that for me is the hardest part. And the way that I usually do that is either I need to step away because maybe I've been too focused on it and I need some external inspiration, watch some movies, go for a walk, listen to some music, read a book, or I need to write a list of what could happen next, just to kind of get myself out of how to connect it to the next bit and just do wild brainstorming of what if.
We're at the final one. How would you get away with murder?
Oh, isn't this being recorded?
It sure is.
It should not be used against me. I would be terrible personally because I can't lie. I have a terribly guilty conscience. So I don't think I could get away with it, but my characters, they could definitely get away with it. Mm-hmm. And I think the way that they would get away with it is that they're a lot more conniving than I am. They can lie a lot better than I can. And I think it's all about the alibi, right? So you have to establish a good alibi. And so I would not be able to get away with murder. And I don't plan to, so... But my characters, especially my next book, so I've got a book coming out, date to be confirmed because of COVID things. It's been pushed a little bit, but League of Liars is my next novel, and it's all about crimes, essentially a prison of criminals who have all committed devious crimes and murder, and they're all trying to get away with it. So you'll have to read that book to see how they get away with it or not.
I will, for sure. Astrid, thank you for being with us on Murder Mondays.
Thank you so much for having me.